Welcome back to another episode of Light Beer, Dark Money. I'm Sean Noble.
And I'm Chris Clements.
And before we jump in, I'm just going to explain, those that are watching, I've got a big mark on my face. I got hit in the face with a pumpkin plant. I fell. I fell in the garden.
Your little girl finally had her revenge.
Yeah, that's right.
the pumpkin patch.
Doing that here.
Is that better?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, we're a little loud right here. We have people before us were a little bit deaf.
Yeah. So, Chris, introduce our esteemed guest.
We have a very esteemed guest, somewhat of royalty here in Arizona.
That's right.
Mr. Fife Symington, good friend of mine and my wife's. Family, friends for a very long time.
Symington the
Fourth.
The
Believe it or not, the fourth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you could say J. Fife Symington the fourth.
J. Fife Symington the fourth.
I mean, I sometimes address him as J. Fife.
Well,
I'm kind of unique in that way.
That's true, but it's pretty rare these days.
Or Fifester
to get to like the third but the fourth is super rare.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I had a big decision to make when I had a son, and so
what did you do?
I couldn't name him Fife.
You couldn't do it.
I couldn't do it.
do
I
the
was like,
next generation.
maybe if I was a ruler of a small city-state or owned a castle, he could be Fife the Fifth. But no, so I broke with tradition there.
Wow.
Yeah.
How'd the family react to that?
My grandfather was disappointed. My dad was very understanding.
Yeah.
Your dad was understanding. Oh,
Yes,
that's good.
he was. So, you know, it's already hard enough like filling out an online form when they ask for, a Roman numeral or whatever. And I'm lucky if 4 is an option. 5 is never there.
Never
yeah.
there.
So, yeah.
I didn't even think about that.
Well, and for those listeners who may not know, J. Fife Symington the fourth is the son of J. Fife Symington the third, who was the governor of Arizona.
Yes, he was.
Back from 1994, right? 90.
Nah.
No, 90.
90.
90.
Yeah.
90 to what?
96, 97.
Yeah.
96.
And actually, it was the election of 1994, his reelect, where we did away, maybe it was after the 90 election, we did away with the runoff because of the weirdness of, we added a runoff after Meekum won in 86. And then Symington wins in 90, and the Democrats like, oh, well, wait a minute, maybe we don't want to run.
Yeah, because there was a full runoff after the 90, and it went on and on.
On and on.
So by 94, there was no more runoff.
Yeah, they were like, nope, not doing that.
Yeah, 94 was a big year.
Big year.
Yeah, it was a great year.
It was, it's interesting because, your dad had, he was campaigning, and it was a pretty easy campaign for him in the respect of what everyone else was going through. But it was a big Republican year. That was my starting in, the big time of politics, running Shadeg's campaign.
And then becoming chief of staff thereafter.
Yeah, but so I it was fun to come up in the Symington era, in Arizona politics.
I remember Shadeg's campaign too. You know where he stands.
That's right.
I love that line. That was great.
He is going to love that you remember that, because that was ripped right out of Goldwater.
And you know what? To this day, you know where he stands.
Yeah, that's true. That has not changed.
That has not changed.
My brother and I still use that line with each other because we were both sort of helping on the campaign trail, and we remembered the Shadeg campaign, and we always go, you know where he stands.
That's so cool. That's so classic. Boy, they talk about a rush of memories from that. Because those were based off of the weekly columns that Goldwater used to write when he was a senator. Where do you stand, sir? Mm-hmm. And so Shadeg, took it to where he stands. So that was his big, and it was ubiquitous. I mean, it was on everything, as obviously seared into your memory.
Exactly.
But we're not really here to talk about politics.
Oh,
not
that's
so
actually
much.
refreshing
in some ways.
Yeah.
But Fife, you've been involved. I mean, you're not involved in politics per se, and you are actually involved in agriculture of a different type.
Yes.
We love the ag business.
Yeah, the ag business of and at one time you're very involved in growing tomatoes, as memory serves. Yeah. But now you're involved in a different type of bud.
I switched to a different cash crop.
A different cash crop.
So
tell our listeners a little bit about your newest business and its impact and how you see that business. It's really quite interesting where we've gone just as a state in terms of our approach to, I'll just say marijuana legislation, the growth of the marijuana business.
Yeah.
And you've been a pioneer in that regard.
And I never thought I'd be doing what I'm doing today, So I started growing greenhouse tomatoes 25 years ago. And after 20 years of fighting over literally pennies a pound, I started to pay attention to the quote unquote green revolution that was going on right here in Arizona, where they, on a state level legalized the growth and distribution of marijuana. And I was ready for a change.
So you did the transition right as that initiative passed. Was that 2018?
I got into I think it was 2013
when medical
marijuana
started.
And I got into it in 2016.
Okay.
So, and it was at that point, I always like to say that like the people that started in production were probably doing it before it was legalized, and that's where they got their expertise. And so before it was legal, they would grow marijuana in closets and basements, because they had to keep it secret. And then all of a sudden, the state legalized it, and so people went out and built bigger closets and basements. You know what I mean? Because that's what they knew how to do, right? And didn't really recognize that there was a paradigm shift that was going to happen, and that eventually costs were going to matter, that supply would meet demand, and that, people would have to really get a little more tight when it came to cost controls and things like that. And so I saw the opportunity to buy an old tomato greenhouse and retrofit it to put it into cannabis production, and basically take what had been a closet industry and go into full-blown commercial agriculture
now
style.
This just an interesting question on I don't know if it's an interesting question, but I've got interest in it. What do you do differently growing tomato plants versus cannabis? I mean, you talk about retrofitting. What does that entail? Does it need more water? Does it need less water, more sun, less sun?
Yeah, I think the biggest single difference as far on the farming side is that cannabis is it's very sensitive to day length. So a tomato plant, you plant it once at the beginning of the season, and it grows for a couple months, and then you start harvesting tomatoes every week for another 4 months.
Right.
Let's say a cannabis plant. It basically just grows in about 12 weeks, and then you harvest it, and in harvesting it, you basically pull the whole plant out of the ground, and then you have to start over.
Got it.
And it's light sensitive in that as when the day length starts getting shorter, that's when it flowers.
Okay.
And so as it thinks it's going into winter, it's going to create these, it wants to go into seed production, and so what you do in a cannabis greenhouse is you manipulate the length of the day with blackout curtains to trick that plant into flowering.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
So
interesting.
They call it light deprivation.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Fascinating stuff.
Well, and you've parlayed that into one of the largest agricultural, I guess, institutions in the West.
Yeah, it's been remarkable actually watching.
You and I have talked about
Yeah.
this, but it's really fascinating. So please tell us a story of how that began, because you're up in
Snowflake
and Taylor,
Arizona.
Yeah, up near my old
in what is a very stalwart Mormon community.
That's right.
And how did you convince these very traditional Mormons to allow you to build this, the infrastructure and the employment that has been created up there, which is significant?
Right.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story.
In a lot of ways, it was like a grassroots political campaign.
Yeah.
So we'll tie politics back into it now. And I'll start with I moved up to Snowflake in the summer of 2016, and actually rented Senator Jeff Flake's grandmother's home. That's where I lived, just to bring it full circle. But no, I moved up there. There was a
Jeff Flake's back. He's looking for a job.
Exactly. So there was a 40-acre glass greenhouse, high-tech greenhouse, Dutch style, fully mechanized, and it had been in tomato production, and then the owners shuttered it in the previous year, in 2015. So it was sitting there. Imagine a empty 40-acre glass building.
It's amazing.
Just
It's
sitting
huge.
there on the edge of town,
Yeah.
right? And greenhouses.
Talk about fortuitous.
Well,
I mean,
yeah, amazing. You know?
Yeah.
And because at that time I was working with an agricultural land broker, and I was looking at land all over the state for where I was going to go build my dream greenhouse. And then, there was one sitting empty in Snowflake, which is one of the best places in the United States of America to have a greenhouse.
Is that right?
And it is, yeah.
Okay.
So it's sort of interesting the way the greenhouses work is you have a very low cost of production because you're relying on the natural elements for as much as possible. So what's great about Snowflake is it sits around 5,500 feet in elevation. So you still get hot days, but it cools down a lot at night. And then you also get like about 300 sunny days a year there. And you've got ample water, and you have low humidity. So it's all really, except for about 6 weeks when they have their monsoon season.
Yeah.
But it's an ideal place to grow cannabis or any other crop for that matter. So, when I was talking about closets,
can grow cannabis like a fine wine.
like a fine, exactly. So when people grow cannabis in warehouses, they're using artificial light, and they're using dehumidification equipment, and they've got to have air conditioning, and they have to do all these things, whereas we just have the natural environment.
Yeah.
We're using natural sunlight, and we're just opening and closing vents in order to maintain temperature and humidity control.
That's amazing.
So,
Wow.
And how big is it now?
it's 40 acres.
It's still the 40
Yeah,
acres.
40 acres, yeah. So, I went up to Snowflake and I said, look, you guys have this amazing facility here that needs constant maintenance, or it's going to basically, you just...
Kids are going to go throw rocks at the window.
Yeah, it's going to be a broken glass mess within
Yeah.
5 years, and I could convert this now. I could put it into cannabis production, and it would be a huge driver of jobs. And that resonated with the community up there. And I did a lot of outreach, talked to a lot of different groups, explained to them, the way the medical marijuana program worked in Arizona, that we weren't going to be selling any of the product in Snowflake. This was just a crop we were growing in a greenhouse, and that these were going to be really good jobs and be a net benefit for the community. And the town council, after like 2 P&Z meetings and 3 town council meetings, they gave me the approval. They took that leap of faith on me, and I think everyone's really happy to this day they did. We employ about 350 people up there in a town of 5,000.
I was going to say, you've got to be one of the biggest employers in town.
Yes.
If not the
More than the
biggest.
pig farm.
Yeah, I think we're the
Is
biggest.
the pig farm still up there?
The pig farm is still up there. Yes, exactly. And when the wind blows, you wish you could smell the cannabis.
They're right. That was the one thing that I never liked about when driving from Shola to Holbrook. We had to go through the north end of Snowflake, and that's where the pig farm was.
Yeah.
And, ooh, it was stinky.
I was worried in the beginning that the odor would be a problem for the town, and I had multiple people tell me, because they would say that's nothing compared to the pig farm.
Right. Oh my
How do you
gosh.
make sure that a facility like that is secure? Like, I would imagine that's a big concern.
Yeah, especially in the very beginning, it was a concern. So we have a 16-foot fence with barbed wire that goes around the entire 40-acre facility, and then there are cameras everywhere. I think the ICR, the camera maker, told us we are the largest camera installation in the state of Arizona.
And how do you protect yourself then on theft? I would imagine that could be a big problem.
Yeah, so there's just one ingress egress,
Yeah.
and we have a full-time security department, and everything is monitored all the time. The other thing too is nobody's going to go steal a whole cannabis plant. It's big and unwieldy and all this sort of stuff, and just once you get to the harvest period, there's another 8 weeks of work that goes into it before you end up with that bud, that flower at the end that's dried. And so it gets more and more compact. And so if you can imagine, the greenhouses are fairly open, and then we move to the processing area, and finally you get down to 1 pound bags of marijuana. And that room is tightly controlled with limited access. That anything that somebody would want to take is pretty well monitored. So,
What now? Have we? I don't know whether we have this issue in Arizona as much as definitely in California, maybe even in Colorado. But one of the things that because I was, full disclosure, I ran the No campaign on marijuana legalization, recreational legalization in 2016, and one of the arguments that we made was that this wasn't going to stop the black market, as evidenced by California and Colorado, and that's continuing to be an issue. How does that impact your business? I mean, you're a legitimate business, but you've got, the cartels that have massive grows kind of all over the place. Seems like they're mostly in Colorado or California. I don't know that there are any here, but has that impacted your business at all?
I really don't feel any impact to a black market. I think, supply has, risen to meet demand in Arizona, and starting in 2022, we kind of had an oversupply in Arizona. And so Arizona is one of the least expensive places in the United States to go into a dispensary and buy a product.
Interesting.
And so you're at a point now where there's just really no reason to go to a black market because you've got, plentiful, high quality product that's been tested and gone through this whole DHS process. And so I anecdotally, I know there are illegal grows in Arizona, but I think all of that product heads out of the state to other markets that have more of a supply-demand imbalance, where the price of marijuana is much higher.
Now,
I just have to point out one thing about California, because it's so classic California. They legalized recreational marijuana, and sales went down in the state. So only California could mess up legalizing marijuana, right? But they basically simultaneously they legalized it. They burdened it with a ridiculous amount of regulation and environmental rules and taxation, all right, on the people that went through the process to do it legally. And then they completely stopped enforcing the law on the people doing it illegally.
Oh my God.
And so
that's kind of what's happening in New York as well, right?
Yeah,
You've got all these illegal dispensaries popping up all over New York City and everything else, and they just won't enforce the law.
The exact same
That's
thing. So they're
crazy.
They're starting to realize, both California and New York, that they're losing a tremendous amount of tax revenue.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They
you would
need
think.
to start enforcing the law in order to drive people into their regulated
And
market.
you mentioned a little bit about this idea of quality control for marijuana, but what educate our listeners and us as well, what is that process by which it gets to market, it gets to the dispensary, and what sort of process has it gone through to get there?
Right. So it's important to understand that cannabis is actually one of those plants that cleans the soil. Basically, anything that's in that soil is going to get absorbed into that plant. After the Chernobyl disaster, they planted that whole area with hemp to basically suck the radiation right out of the ground. And so good for the soil, but you got to really make sure that you had clean soil and there were no pesticides anywhere nearby, because that gets sucked right up into the plant. So in the state of Arizona, we have rigorous testing requirements where we test for things like heavy metals and pesticides, because the cannabis plant will naturally absorb all of that from the ground. And that's one of the things that makes buying black market product or stuff that's come in from Mexico or whatever really dangerous is any of those heavy metals or pesticides will get super concentrated in the product, and then if you're lighting it on fire and inhaling it in your lung, it's just not good for you.
Wow. I did not even think about that. Did not know that they absorbed that much.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, one of the that's a huge concern now that you think about it. But also having it get mixed with fentanyl or anything of that stuff, sort, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So
now,
everything goes through, like I said, this process. So once we harvest it, we have to send it to an independent lab. They run the whole test. We receive a certificate of analysis, and then that goes onto a QR code. And basically, you can walk into any dispensary, any product you buy is going to have a QR code. You can zap it with your phone, and it gives the full lab analysis, and it tells you, what farm it came from. It tells you everything that was applied to that crop. It's like all the information is right there.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Now, you initially started with supplying to medical dispensaries, but you do recreational now that it's legal here in Arizona, right?
Yeah, so when we passed recreational use in the state, all of the medical dispensaries became what they call dual licenses, and were able to sell to recreational patients as well.
Got it.
So if you can walk into any of these dual licensed dispensaries, and if you have a medical card, you're allowed to purchase more of the product and a higher THC level of the product, and you don't have to pay the taxes.
Pay tax, right?
Yeah.
Got it. And there's been quite a bit of revenue generated for the state.
Yeah, we, I want to say last year it was $210 million in tax revenue, more than the alcohol industry, more than the beer industry paid to the state of Arizona.
Who would have thought? But I mean, that industry's down right now considerably.
Yeah.
I mean, they would probably argue a lot in some respects because of legalized marijuana.
Yeah, well, it could be. Actually, the marijuana industry is down about 10-15% this year too, but that's really from price compression more than anything else. Yeah, just weed is cheap here.
And you only supply for here in Arizona?
Yeah, you cannot cross state lines.
Oh, interesting.
That would be felony drug trafficking.
Okay, because the feds haven't, right?
Exactly.
But you also have to deal with the issue of banking. I mean, are you all cash, or is that something that doesn't impact you like it does the dispensary?
It doesn't really impact us. You know, I think there are a lot of misconceptions around that. So on the wholesale side, just about everybody pays with ACH, with just wire transfers between their banks, right? At the dispensary itself, it is cash because we can't accept credit cards. But that's really the only, we're not allowed access to the Visa, MasterCard network.
Right.
Because of, again, the whole federally illegal standpoint. But banks actually are allowed to work with you. Okay. And so we have banks, 3 different banks that we work with all the time. Now, a lot of the big national banks like Wells Fargo or Bank of America, whatever, they're not going to get involved, but it's really because they don't want the compliance risk. Where sort of these smaller regional banks will dedicate a person to making sure that everything you're doing is compliant, and then they charge us a ton of fees to bank there. You know what I mean? And then
you're high risk, we're going to charge you more.
Exactly, yeah. So
what because there has been for the last few years federal legislation proposed to try to lift those federal restrictions that was aced off of something recently. I can't remember the exact one on that. But you're the production side. Have you thought about going into the dispensary side, or are you part of that?
I actually have 9 dispensaries as well. Yeah, they're under the brand Soul Flower, SOL Flower. Okay. So 5 here in the greater Phoenix area and 4 down in Tucson.
Yeah, there you go. So if you want your weed, go to Soul Flower.
Tell them Fife sent you.
But you've also been really active in the regulatory piece. I mean, you testify at the state legislature pretty much every year on different things. Yeah. Enlighten our listeners about what that's all about. There's a little bit of a conflict between what we see in the Delta 9 beverage industry and the growth of that nationally, and what they've tried to do here in the state. We've had some discussions about that in terms of the federal loophole that allows certain amounts of THC to be in beverages. And how do you see that developing over the next
So it's kind of
4 or 5 years?
It's become the Wild West when it comes to hemp.
Yeah.
Right? So hemp and cannabis, it's the exact same plant, right? But some of the plants have a higher THC than others, right? So I think they defined it as 0.3% THC. If it's that or below, it's hemp. But if it's 0.4, then it's marijuana,
cannabis,
right? And so there was a loophole in the Farm Bill that legalized the production of hemp, basically. And what you can do is, or what people are doing, is you can take hemp, or you can take a CBD isolate that comes from hemp, and you can super concentrate it, and you can create artificial THC. So it basically has the same effect as THC from a marijuana plant. You just got there a different way.
Interesting.
You took 10,000 pounds of hemp, right, and then you just imagine you squished it all together and distilled it, and eventually you ended up with a few pounds of THC. And since it came from hemp, it's not subject to all the normal rules. And so you can go into any smoke shop in the state of Arizona. You wonder why these smoke shops have proliferated all over Arizona, because they're selling synthetic THC, right, legally in massive doses without any of the testing requirements we were talking about. So you can buy dirt cheap CBD isolate from China, imported in the United States, super concentrated into synthetic THC, and then sell it in a smoke shop. And so that's one of the big issues, and it keeps on coming up at the legislature every year, what to do with this product. And I mean, they're trying to figure it out in Washington. California just last week.
It's really dangerous because it's not regulated.
There's no testing requirement.
And it's coming from China, so who knows?
Yeah, exactly. So it's scary. Last week, California.
That's the dark side of the business. Right?
Yes, exactly. So.
Well, and the smoke shop. So this would be some crossover to the vaping issue.
Yes.
In some cases.
Yeah.
So this is It's all very interesting how this all kind of.
And it's so
works together.
For me, we go through. We have a lot of compliance costs in our industry, and we have to have cameras everywhere. Every employee in a dispensary has to have a background check and get fingerprinted and receive a facility agent card from the Department of Health Services. We go through all these steps. We can't make any packaging that appeals to children. We can't name products that appeal to children. You walk into one of these smoke shops and everything looks like candy. Nobody's been background checked. There are no cameras. They're not paying the 15% tax. They're just basically selling synthetic THC.
It's sort of like moonshining in some ways. It'd be like, there's so many regulations around the alcohol industry, and very, very similar. Yeah. And all the testing requirements, the labeling requirements, if you make something that looks like a soda pop in the alcohol industry, you get instantly slammed. Right. And the feds won't approve it and all this other stuff. So, from that perspective, if you had some federal, approvals, would you be able to tap down on a lot of the Wild West? Is that an argument?
Yeah, it technically is still illegal. It's just nobody's enforcing it. The Arizona Attorney General came out and said, hey, look, this is illegal. Like this synthetic THC. Yeah. But there isn't really any appetite for enforcement. Right. And so it's continuing to proliferate.
And what, I guess this is a silly question probably, but who would be in charge of enforcing, cracking down on the smoke shops? Is that the Attorney General? Is that?
I bet if you had the political will to raid a couple of these smoke shops and take some people to jail, it would stop pretty quick.
I think so. But
it would stop immediately.
That's not Phoenix PD per se.
So one of the arguments was, well,
DPS?
Since it came from hemp, then the Arizona Department of Agriculture should get involved with that, and which I personally don't think makes any sense because
they don't really have any enforcement mechanism.
Exactly. DHS
they can fine probably, but
DHS does a really good job. They've got 9 years of experience now. They've set up an enforcement division. They have all the rules and regulations. They have all the testing. And it just seems to me that it would be a no-brainer to say that if it's THC, then DHS should...
Department of Health Services.
Yeah, they have a marijuana division that does this,
And they can get help from
law
DPS,
enforcement.
AG's office, whatever.
All they need to do is have the ability to fine these guys, and that would take care of it as well. I think you know what I mean.
Well, you fine them, but maybe you make an example of one that's egregious, right? Yeah, where a lot of kids are getting impacted, a lot of families are being impacted. There's enough political will to make an example of someone,
right?
Because to your point, you've done so much work in creating a regulatory framework that's solid, that makes sense.
Well, and that's the thing, is
right?
That,
and even going back to my old industry, we continue to rely on that regulatory. A lot of people don't like it. They don't like a 3-tier system, or they don't like state regulation of alcohol. But in many respects, the only way for cannabis to be a viable product state by state is that state regulatory framework.
Well, that's a great point, because from the standpoint of someone who was on the opposition to the recreational legalization, we use the arguments of, you don't want to be able to, your kids aren't going to be able to know the difference. You've got these bad actors, the black market, blah, blah, blah. There was no discussion about this compressed, THC or
Synthetic,
CBD,
yeah.
synthetic stuff, and yet for anyone who was opposed to legalization of recreational marijuana, they should be screaming bloody murder
Exactly.
at these smoke shops doing
Yeah.
this stuff. And I wasn't even aware of it. So
I've never understood how these smoke shops really exist. I mean,
But now we
even
know.
even
I mean, if-
in high school, I
But if they're
would walk into
competing,
them like, oh.
if in this day and age they're existing because they're competing with legal
Dispensaries, yeah.
dispensaries,
Yeah.
then I get that, because they're going to be able to market in a way that when we defeated marijuana legalization in 2016, the industry came back, changed the way the language was. They put a lot of these restrictions upon themselves in this language. Because we hit them hard on it. They don't know the difference between a gummy bear that's not THC and one that is. Their packaging, all that stuff, and so they answered all those questions in the next round and won. But now you've got the smoke shops that have just completely flouted that whole thing, because
None
it's
of the
like, not our
regulations
problem.
pertain to them, and you don't even have to be like, you can't walk into a dispensary in Arizona unless you're 21 years old and have
Right.
a valid driver's license. There's no rule, keeping you from walking into
Yeah.
a smoke shop.
That's a great point.
So nothing's changed in 40 years.
No.
Yeah, but that seems like an easy fix with somebody who has some political will.
Yeah. Yeah.
And enough outrage by parents and communities to say these things need to be shut down or regulated
Well, I mean,
in a way, in the same way. They follow in the same regulations.
Yeah.
yeah.
Which
Sounds like
that's an easy fix that even the legislature could probably do, right?
They can't really get on the same page as
No.
far as that's
No.
concerned. So, yeah, the smoke shop guys are using the hemp lobby to say, hey,
Are the smoke shop guys kind of the mob?
I'm not.
You're not going to go there,
No,
are
I'm
you?
not. I'm not going to say.
I'll say it for you. I think they're kind of the mob. I think they're kind of the shady
They're the
ones. in
bootleggers?
this. Yeah, they're the bootleggers.
They're
in some
trying to
ways.
cloak themselves in this idea that they're Arizona
Small business
Arizona
Small
farmers
business with-
growing
with-
hemp, and,
with shelves and shelves of bongs.
But we're at.
And I'm just speaking from memory, from the wood and nickel in Tucson back in the day.
Is that what it was called?
The wood and nickel smoke shop right there on 4th Avenue. Rows and rows of bongs, and this is back when obviously marijuana is illegal, and
Yeah.
you're like, how do they get away with all this
They're for
paraphernalia?
tobacco. It's for
because
tobacco.
they were selling cigars, man.
Just selling cigars and whippets.
Right.
Back in the day.
Well, how can people, look, there's a lot of people, a lot of our listeners, I'm sure, interested in this, in the weed issue.
Yeah, and,
So they
and the
go to-
industry and the regulatory issues
Right.
too.
So where can they go, learn more, participate in what you're doing?
Yeah, so I think it'll become a big issue again through this legislative session. So it'll be back in the news, and there'll be, I think, more of a concerted effort to try to address the synthetic THC issue and try to bring it into a regulated structure. So
Yeah. Well, we'll be watching that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Might need to have a couple legislators on and talk about it.
Yeah, we should.
Maybe even DHS director.
Yeah, we could do that too.
What's going on?
I'm happy to come back for that.
Yeah,
Okay.
we'll do it. Yeah, I'll bet you would. have a little round
Well, I
table.
mean, until we had dinner as couples dinner a couple months ago, and I didn't even realize how active you were in the legislature until we started talking about some of these issues,
Right.
as it relates to just THC and beverages,
Yeah.
and the regulatory issues around that, and the growth of that, and so it was really eye opening.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting. And, Congress, the U.S. Congress has realized, too, that they basically, they didn't mean to legalize synthetic THC,
Right.
but they did. And so there's a good chance that something comes out of Washington as well.
Yeah, I know they're debating that right now, but
Yeah.
nothing good's going to come out of this session.
Well,
I
I mean,
agree.
we got next year. We got next year.
We
Always
got
next
2 weeks till D-Day.
Oh
and
my
so
gosh.
they haven't even figured that out.
I don't know if anything comes out next year either.
That's
though.
maybe our next podcast. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I do think that there is that this issue in general has gotten enough attention now that even with whoever's in control, Republican or Democrat, there is some definitely bipartisan, push
Right.
to try to get this resolved. So once we get through in this presidential election, and the temperature comes down a little bit, maybe we get some solutions done. But who knows? Yeah.
Hope springs eternal.
Hope
That's right.
spring.
I am an optimist.
Well, thank you for your friendship. Thank you for coming on. Thanks for your legacy, and really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's
Yeah.
a pleasure to be here.
Love to have you back sometime.
Yeah,
and
love
especially,
it,
especially, I mean, at the beginning of the legislative session in January, I think it'd be,
I think
you
it'd
can
be
come
great,
back and talk to us about really what we need to be thinking of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you both so much.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for
guys.
listening. God bless.
Take care.